My name is Katrina Sibinovska. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for Intertrust Group. We are a publicly listed company that it operates in the financial services industry. The headquarters are in Amsterdam. This is where I'm based. But we have 44 plus offices across the world, and we operate in all regions like the Americas, Western Europe, rest of the world, Asia. We have Center of Excellence building that in India. So yeah.
Hi, I'm Ian Bishop-Leggett. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Schroders Personal Wealth, which is a joint venture between Lloyds Bank and Schroders. I've been at the company for 2 years now, and we've had to completely set up security from scratch as though it was a greenfield site. It's been quite a challenge.
Hi, I'm Jerry Perulo. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer of Intercontinental Exchange, the parent company of the New York Stock Exchange and several other financial services companies. I've been working here at ICE for about 20 years now, and we've put a huge emphasis on the human element of cybersecurity, which led us to begin working with Tessian about 3 years ago now.
Hi, I'm Puneet. I'm the head of IT at GoCardless. I've been here just over a year. Prior to GoCardless, I was at WeWork and Uber. At GoCardless, we're solving the problems in the payment space, both recurring and one-time payments. We're across 5 cities around the world and process about 20 billion in payments every year.
Hi everyone, I'm Robin Savage, Customer Success Lead here at Tessian, and that means that I spend my time working really closely with the customers who use Tessian's technology, making sure that their organizations are kept safe from breaches.
Hi, I'm Sammy Kampgart, co-founder of OpenPath Security and a security researcher.
Hi, I'm Bobby Ford, Chief Security Officer for Hewlett-Packard Enterprise.
Hello there. My name is James McQuiggan, and I am a security awareness advocate at KnowBe4.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tessian's Human Layer Security Summit. I'm Kelly Hogan, Head of Marketing Communications at Tessian, and I'm thrilled to be your host today. On behalf of everyone at Tessian, I want to thank you all for tuning in from across the globe. We started this event with one goal in mind: to bring CISOs, CIOs, and risk and compliance leaders together to grow and propel the human layer security movement. We've heard time and again from industry leaders and reports that human error is the most common cause of data breaches. And that means human-centric security must be the future of enterprise security strategies, which is a shift away from solely focusing on endpoints and networks. So whatever human-centric risks keep you up at night, whether it's account takeover, ransomware, accidental data leakage, or insider threats, we're tackling it all today. And we're going to give you the tools you need to shore up your defenses and help you become a security trailblazer. Today, we have gathered some of the best and brightest minds in the industry to give practical advice on how they've applied human-centric security strategies to tackle these urgent challenges. Our speakers include leaders and experts from Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, Intercontinental Exchange of the New York Stock Exchange, Schroders Personal Wealth, KnowBe4, Intertrust Group, Tessian, and more. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the sessions that we have lined up for you. For those of you joining via LinkedIn Live, there's a link to the chat in the description below. If you experience any technical difficulties at all, don't hesitate to email us directly at events@tessian.com. Last but not least, please share your highlights, your favorite moments or insights from the sessions on your social media networks, and use the hashtag you see on the screen provided so that we can track the conversation. So, without further ado, let's begin. I'm delighted to introduce our very first session, presented by Tessian's CEO and co-founder, Tim Sadler.
Technology is critical to companies' missions, so companies have spent decades securing technology. So why do breaches keep happening? Because there's something even more critical to a company's mission: the people who run the technology. And those people are busy, distracted, and sometimes easily fooled. That's why 95% of breaches are caused by human error. And that's why we invented a new kind of technology: Human Layer Security. It protects technology, machines, and data by protecting the people in charge of them. It learns their unpredictable behavior, maps their evolving relationships, spots threats instantly, and stops them. Not by locking down access, or with endless training, but by empowering your people seamlessly to make smart security decisions at the moment they need it. On any device, on any network, it's crucial protection for the most crucial part of your mission, your people.
Digital transformation has given employees superpowers at their fingertips. We can wire millions of dollars between bank accounts in a few clicks. We can share our entire customer database in a single file on an email. Your people are the gatekeepers to the most sensitive systems and data in the enterprise. And the average person makes 35,000 decisions every single day. Many of these decisions happen at work and are about work. Do I click on this link or not? Do I enter my credentials into this website? Is john@banka.com or john@bankb.com the right recipient for this email? Human error on any one of these decisions can lead to serious breaches of security for companies. And today, 95% of all data breaches are caused by human error. So the question is, how do we keep people secure in these 35,000 decisions? Up until now, security technology has always been about securing technology. Firewalls to secure networks, EDR to secure endpoints and devices. But it's now time for a third paradigm of security, one where technology secures people. We call it human layer security. In April this year, we announced our most significant product release to date, the Human Layer Risk Hub. The Risk Hub combines three crucial elements: behavioral intelligence, automatic threat prevention, and in-the-moment micro-training to help drive behavior change in security. And it works like this. If an employee attempts to do something that may be unsafe or against company policy, like send sensitive data to a personal email account, Tessian's behavioral intelligence models can automatically detect this. We then prevent the threat from happening by stopping the email from being sent, and we can provide in-the-moment training to the employee. This whole cycle is a feedback loop, so our behavioral intelligence models learn and get smarter all the time. Within the Human Layer Risk Hub, we provide a holistic view into the human layer risk score for your organization, granular visibility into individual risk levels and drivers, and recommended actions you can take to help improve your company's overall security posture. At Tessian, we are creating a new paradigm of enterprise security. And this is just the beginning. Because our mission is to secure the human layer by empowering people to do their best work without security getting in their way. We believe in a world where people shouldn't have to be security experts to use a computer. Because securing your mission, that's our mission. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. What an excellent way to start us off today. Now on to our next session. If you're struggling to put people at the center of your cybersecurity strategy, these industry leaders can help. We have a panel of experts here to offer advice on how they've combined training, technology, and policies to engage employees and to ultimately improve their enterprise security posture. So over to Ed Bishop, Tessian's co-founder and chief technology officer.
Thank you, Kelly, and hello, everyone. If you're struggling to put people at the center of your cybersecurity strategy, these industry leaders can help. We're here today to talk to them about how to combine training, tech, and policies to actually engage with employees and improve enterprise security posture. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Bobby Ford, SVP and Chief Security Officer at HP Enterprise, and James McQuiggan, security awareness advocate at KnowBe4. So to kick off, Bobby, do you want to briefly introduce yourself and then followed by James?
Sure. Thanks, Ed. And thanks for having me here. Hi, I'm Bobby Ford, Chief Security Officer for Hewlett-Packard Enterprise.
Hello there. My name is James McQuiggan, and I'm a security awareness advocate over at KnowBe4.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone. First and foremost, maybe James, I'll start with you. Why should security leaders be thinking of putting people at the center of their security strategy?
That's a good question. And when it comes to your strategies within your enterprise organizations, you've got so many people that work within that organization. For me, when you have that many people, you almost have to consider that as each one of those people are a front door to your organization, to your networks, because so many times over the last number of years with phishing attacks and ransomware attacks, it's come down to somebody on their computer getting one of those socially engineered emails, and they click that link and essentially are letting the bad guys, those cyber criminals, into the network. And so when you've got all those front doors and trying to mitigate the risk of having them click on a link and letting in the bad guys, it's important that organizations view that as an important aspect of the security. And so putting them at the center of it and putting focus on that and getting them educated and getting them aware is going to help strengthen those front doors and prevent the bad guys from coming in.
Yeah, we like to say it doesn't matter how much technology and security you have in front of the person. At the end of the day, there's always a person kind of choosing to take actions, choosing to click a link, choosing to wire money, choosing to send that email or reply to that email. So yeah, definitely agree with thinking about every element. And if you go from human all the way to attacker, there's many bits of technology, but still, how can we bring people to the center? You mentioned training and awareness. We're going to touch on that a little bit in the conversation, but maybe Bobby, if I'm right in thinking you've recently moved from Unilever to HP Enterprise, how do you get up to speed with what the security culture is like at a new company? Maybe also figuring out, we've just mentioned the importance of putting people at the center of security strategy. Maybe not every company thinks like that. How do you get up to speed with what it was like before and what you want to gain over time?
Yeah, Ed, thanks. It's a brilliant question. And for me, it starts with listening. Whenever you join an organization, it's important that you listen. And what you're listening for is you want to know who the stakeholders are. You want to know who the influencers are. And you listen as much as possible to identify the stakeholders. And then you want to go and listen to those who are the influencers, because you can't have some sort of preconceived idea of what the organization is, what the culture is, what the appetite is. You can only learn. So you go in and you listen and you learn, and then you take that, which is what I would call business intelligence, by connecting with the people. You take that business intelligence, and then what you bring to the table is, experience and threat intelligence. And I always say that that's where a good cybersecurity strategy happens. It's at the intersection of experience, threat intelligence, and business intelligence.
Yeah, I love that. I love that point about listening. I think every Ciso interview, I imagine they get you to do some level of 30, 60, 90. And it's probably a big red flag if someone comes and says, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. I think I know this, but actually you need to listen, learn who are influential. That doesn't mean seniority. It means like, who do people trust? Who do you need to get buy-in to? Who's leading from security at all levels of the organization? How can you leverage that? Love that point. James, I wonder, we've talked about Bobby just mentioned listening and getting up to speed. What do you see, maybe, not to be too negative, but what do you see companies get wrong? Like, what mistakes can companies make to destroy a security culture? It feels like it's always teetering on the balance, and a couple of wrong mistakes you could tip and lose maybe some good security culture that you had built up over time.
Yeah, with regards to security culture and when organizations are trying to implement it, a lot of the time I've seen is they try to boil the ocean. They try to fix everything all at once. And what you want to do is focus on one or two behaviors that you want to improve in the culture. When we look at security awareness and we look at the security training, we want to make that engaging. We want to make sure that the employees, the users, are coming away with items that they can use not only in the work environment, but they can use at home as well. I've always believed that, when we were growing up, we would be walking down the sidewalk and we get to the end of the sidewalk and we look to the left, or then we look to the right, or sorry, in the UK, we look to the right first. I almost made that mistake a couple of times, but you look to the right, then you look to the left, and then you cross the street. And why do we do that? Because we don't want to get hit by a car, we don't want to get injured, we don't want to, lose our life. The same thing applies when it comes to that awareness with, for example, phishing emails. We have to have that understanding and that wherefore that, when we get one of those emails that come into our inbox, that we check the link, that we ask ourselves a couple questions rather than just react to it. Read that, oh my gosh, the organization is changing our benefits. I'm going to click the link and see what that is. No, you go through a step process to make sure that that it's a real link or it's a phishing link, and then taking the action about it. So with organizations, it's looking at picking up one of those two or three behaviors that you want to change in your culture. Focus on those. Make sure it aligns with the culture, the vision, the mission of your organization, and then work towards achieving that. And then the next quarter, you work on the next set of behaviors.
Yeah. Completely agree. Don't boil the ocean is the thing I took away from that. Priority, have a stacked rank and just go after a couple to start with. Maybe, James, sticking with you, because I know this is something you're really passionate about, but how can our audience think about training and awareness programs? You've already mentioned training a good number of times already. How can they think about it having a positive impact on security culture? I think sometimes training programs got to get a bad rep across organizations, but how can our audience think about implementing these in a positive way so that people engage and it is effective, etc.?
So when you have your training and awareness program, that's the foundation of the cybersecurity culture that you're going to have in your organization. It's kind of like when we go to school and we learn about science and maths and history and English. All of those kind of come together to help us later on in life. Whether we think that algebra still helps us later in life, I know some of us are still figuring that out, but those are the foundation. And when we do our security awareness and those training programs, that's that foundation for all of us. And we want to move on from that and build upon that to reinforce in the culture. So having that engaging content, thinking of your cybersecurity program, your awareness and training, your culture program, thinking of it like a hacker, but moving forward and planning it like a marketer. You get with your marketing people, they're doing marketing campaigns all the time. And so if you can get with them and figure out, okay, these are the different assessments we're going to do. This is the new literature or the media we're going to put out. This is the training material. And coordinate that for different groups, for different people. So that way it's not always that, oh, here we go, it's that one time of the year where we're going to get our security awareness training. No, it needs to be something that's a part of the culture, part of the organization, that's constantly happening throughout the organization, throughout the year. So that way people aren't looking at it going, oh, here's the security stuff again. And actually, whether you've got videos and they look forward to, oh, hey, what's the new video this week? Whether they say that, I don't know, but having that positive reinforcement that comes in with either seeing the video or getting the latest update or a meeting that they get to participate in, doing things to try and elevate the interest in the cybersecurity. Not everybody's going to be interested in it. I know not everybody's not interested in accounting, but we need the accounting for finances and running our business. But it is something that's a part of it, so it's just a matter of getting people engaged and interested into that topic.
Yeah, I think everyone's now going to be pinging all their marketing teams, trying to lean on some marketing budget. But in all seriousness, I love that idea of thinking about it like a marketer. Bobby, I wonder as a practitioner whether you have anything to share and add to that. I know it's something that you've talked about previously at our summit, but what have you seen done well? What have you seen done poorly? how can people navigate that kind of reinforcement of positive training and awareness, not treating it like a one-off yearly boring exercise?
Yeah, I think you and James touched upon it. The challenge is that oftentimes you have to deploy your awareness program within an overall compliance program for the organization. And it's important to be mindful that it's not just security awareness that the organization has to deliver. So when you look at the larger picture, there are various types of awareness programs that are being deployed, various types of education programs, various types of compliance programs. So the trick, right, the way you crack the nut is figure out, how can I put a little piece of cyber within all of these various awareness programs that go out, so that, like you said, it's not just a one-off. Then it's, how can I create a platform? How can I create some site? How can I create material that I'm not just pushing out, but that the organization is hungry to come and pull from? How can I create a wiki page, or how can I create a SharePoint site? How can I create whatever the platform is that your organization uses to collaborate? How can I create a site that's so enticing and so appealing that even when it's not once a year, that everyone recognizes that it's the go-to site for all things cyber, that it's the go-to site for all things awareness? Because experience has taught me that when you create a platform, or when you create a site that's filled with information, that it's not just about that one-off and that once a year, but that individuals will go there on a repeated and a regular basis in order to consume information.
Yeah, I love that idea of, it's kind of like a high leverage investment, right? Like, you invest in one area, make it super high quality, make it really engaging, and that can be just used over and over again. New joiners, people who've been here a long time. Maybe Bobby, I mean, just staying on that tact. So your team put in this investment of, let's say, the site, this one-stop shop. Whose responsibility is it within the organization to make sure that people visit it? Like, is that just the job of security, or does it need to be business-wide? All leaders need to be encouraging people with engagement and checking and challenging. Should we be talking about security in one-to-ones with our employees? Should it be part of a, your performance review? How well have you engaged with, like, how far do we take this?
I think that's a really good question, and I would love to give like a straightforward answer, right, Ed? But I'll use the classic. It depends. It really depends on the organization. It depends on the industry that the organization is in. It depends on the culture. It depends on the culture of the organization. And then it depends on the track record of the organization. Listen, you have some organizations that are fantastic, that are phenomenal at security awareness, right? And they're phenomenal. They have cultures that are hungry for security awareness. They have cultures that constantly want to learn more about cyber. And then you have others who could really care less. And so what you have to do is you have to assess the overall culture, and then develop a strategy, right, that's commensurate with the culture that you've encountered. And the reason why I put it like that, Ed, is because I would hate to give hey, you need to make sure that you put it in everyone's performance review. You need to make sure that you put it in an end of year review. And then you have some CISO who's out there who already has a culture where they're doing phenomenal at security awareness. And they come in with this sort of draconian approach when that may not necessarily be what that organization needs. So it really depends on where you are and where the organization is.
Yeah, fantastic answer. Maybe, James, taking a little bit back to training awareness, we're reading, I mean, I don't like refreshing the security news to see how many times ransomware has been mentioned. But if we just pick ransomware, I'd love to maybe go end to end of like a training and awareness program. How can something quite far away, detached from ransomware, actually improve people's awareness about the risk that's out there? We know the risk that's out there, but how do we get it to that intern in marketing and sales that resonates and they take a moment and they think about it. I just like using the example of like a security threat. Let's pick ransomware, but it'd be interesting for you to go like end to end and just think about how a security program can get there to actually change the awareness of that, intern who's maybe not heard ransomware before.
Yeah, when you've got people that are coming into your organization, or even people that have been in your organization for many, many years, and they're not familiar with the cybersecurity terms and concepts, and they're not hearing what's going on, whether it's an oil company that's been hit with ransomware, or airline companies, or headphone makers. A lot of the time, when they're so disconnected from it, they don't have that awareness. And so when we bring that awareness to them, when we start talking about, hey, this is a threat to our organization, and you have that ability to help stop that threat. But and Bobby was talking about it as well with regards to that knowledge gap. Just because they're aware of something doesn't mean that they care. And that is certainly one of the challenges within a security awareness program, is how do you get them to care? Some of that's going to come through on technology, some of that is going to come through on processes. You have that awareness, you're going to take this awareness training. If you may or may not understand the reason why you're taking it. Here is why you want to be taking this training program, because of all the risks that are out there. We need to make sure that you know how to protect the organization. And if you see something, that you have an ability to say something. And so the technology comes in to have that, for example, like a phishing button within your email client that can send it to IT to say, hey, look, I spotted this phishing email, and I'm letting you know about it, so either it's real or it's fake, or you can take the necessary actions to correct that. That communication, going back to the IT or your InfoSec department, and they discover that this is a real phishing email, can then come with a reward. Everybody loves company swag. Well, I know I do. But, whether a company swag or a $20, 20-pound gift card, to Starbucks or to someplace, some type of reward. As human beings, we like to be noticed, or most of us do. We like to be noticed and get that pat on the back or that recognition. And so if you have that intern and they go through the training and you say, now look, if you spot a phishing email, you want to click on this button and let IT know. And if it turns out to be something, hey, there might be a reward. And so people appreciate those kind of rewards, and rather the carrot versus the stick concept. And then that way, that kind of helps drive that security culture, and people are going, hey, where'd you get the cool, Yeti cup? Oh, I got it because I spot a fish. You spotted a fish, the conversation starts, and it starts spreading like wildfire. I have a colleague who is a Ciso in a law firm, and he does something very, very similar, but ironically, he also has a top 10 board of who are the people that catch the most fishes in the organization. And it's not the $25 gift card to Starbucks that they like. It's seeing their name on the list, at the top of the list, that has them stating that the most fishes. That is what drives human behavior. And that little bit of competition, but also that recognition as well, can go a long way to getting either somebody that's an intern or somebody that's been there for 30 years to take that interest within the organization.
Yeah, it's all about getting people to care. That's it. I really think that is 90% of the battle. And loving all of the innovation around gamification, rewards. It feels like we're just scratching the surface of of where this can go. So, okay, right. Let's move on to the next section. We started with culture, then we moved on to training and awareness. And Bobby, and maybe this question for you. And this is around, just technology in general, security technology. Let's be honest, security technology often has quite a bad reputation for disrupting end users, breaking down, sometimes even breaking down the trust between the security and the rest of the business. Why is it so important to think about implementing security policies and technology that gets out of the way and lets people do their job, versus the opposite, which is just, you can't do your job because you're just seeing alerts, you're scared, you don't want to click anything. How can technology empower people to do their best work, but also help protect people? I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that piece.
Yeah, I do have some thoughts on it. And what I'll do, Ed, is I'll share a story that I've shared before that, at least for me, when I think about security and I think about solutions, it's the illustration that I use. So when my daughter was first learning how to walk, it was scary for me as a parent. And the reason why it was scary for me as a parent is because she would stumble and she would fall and she would hurt herself. But I recognized that that's part of the process of learning how to walk. And she had to go through that in order to learn how to walk. So then my responsibility as her father became to make sure that any of the obstacles that were in her way were taken out of the way. If there was anything dangerous in the way, I would remove it so that I could create an environment that was conducive for her learning how to walk. Now, Ed, the trick was doing all of that without her being aware of it. So I was operating around her, moving things out of the way. She wasn't even aware that I was at work doing these things, but she was learning how to walk, and I was creating an environment around her that she wasn't aware that allowed her to be safe. When I think of security, that's the mental model that I use. When we deploy solutions and we deploy technologies, the best solutions and the best technologies are deployed and they're implemented in a way that our users are unaware of them. Because our responsibility is to create this environment that's conducive for them to carry out and to conduct their business. So I think that if you adapt a mental model that's similar to that, that says, hey, I want to make sure that the better the security is, the less aware that they are that it's even deployed, then I think you'll be successful.
I think it's a great analogy. I've actually heard you give that analogy before, but I enjoyed hearing it a second time because it really hits home just the importance of letting someone feel safe. But actually, maybe a lot is going on behind the scenes. But like they can just focus on what they're up to. Your daughter can focus on walking, but you're doing the heavy lifting behind the scenes, making sure that she is safe and your staff are safe. I wonder, something that we think a lot about Tessian is sometimes I feel security technology is built for the SOC, right? Your team, the security analysts, are not necessarily built for the end user. And I wonder whether we can, over time, bridge that gap of getting that right balance of, to your point, technology is behind the scenes doing lots, making people safe, but sometimes engaging with that end user, nudging them, telling them, hey, something looks really unusual, but I'm going to empower you to make the final decision. Bobby, I don't know if you've had success in getting that right balance of not doing too much behind the scenes, because sometimes the end users, maybe even the only person who can, with that delay, I do know what this email is. I'm the only person who maybe knows what this email is, and I trust it. Like, how do you get that right balance of empowering people to make security decisions themselves and not doing everything behind the scenes?
Yes, so still trying to get there, I'll be honest, but I have this vision, and in this vision, what I'd love to do is I would love to create a feedback loop. And ideally, if someone clicks on a malicious email, or they click on a suspicious fish, or they report an incident, letting them know what the potential impact could have been had they not reported it. I think that would be so amazing to go back to that individual and say, hey, listen, thank you for reporting this link. Had you clicked on this link, this could have potentially happened, right? You could have cost the company, X amount. And then it empowers them. And going back to the point that James made earlier, then when they start having conversations and they start talking about what could have happened had they only clicked on this link, I think that's amazing. And I think that would have an impact. I think that would have an impression.
I love that, and we are actually coming up to time, so we're going to have to stop there. But I think that's a great vision to end on. It's almost, Bobby, as though you know the product roadmap of Tessian, but I promise I didn't seed Bobby with that before he said that. But watch this space, because we're super interested in building out these like automated workflows, letting people know what would have happened if they had done this or if they hadn't taken this really good action. And again, back to James's point, rewards, making people feel like they're part of the solution, celebrating. I think that can all come through automated workflows. So great vision to end on. But I'm afraid that is that's all we've got time for. A huge thank you to Bobby and James for sharing their insights with us today. And thank you to you, our audience, for joining us. I'm handing back over to Kelly, who can take us on to our next session. Thank you.
Solarwinds rocked the security industry last year and continues to do so well into 2021. But before we blame Russia and nation states, should we look at our own internal training and awareness programs first? Up next, ethical hacker Sami Kemkar shares his take on what CISOs can learn from these hacks, and most importantly, how you can secure your own employees to prevent the worst from happening in your organization.
Hi, everyone, and thanks so much to Sami for joining us today. Great to have you back for your second summit. Sami is a privacy and security researcher, computer hacker, and entrepreneur who famously released the fastest spreading worm of all time on MySpace, temporarily bringing it down. Today, we're going to talk about two breaches from last year that have dominated the headlines: Solarwinds and Twitter. While you might associate these attacks with malware, account takeover, social engineering, state-sponsored initiatives, there are strong arguments to be made that human error played a big part in these attacks. But instead of focusing on just what went wrong, we're going to try and highlight what you can do to avoid similar incidents. So Sami, to start, it would be great if you could give us a really quick recap on what happened with SolarWinds and the Twitter hacks, and maybe touch on where and how these attacks originated.
Sure. I mean, with SolarWinds, we had essentially, SolarWinds is a company that produces remote tools for managing many machines and businesses and organizations. And one of their tools, their Orion tool, was essentially malware was added. The problem isn't that malware was added, but how did they actually get into the systems in order to be able to add that? And well, as many attacks, with almost all attacks, there's really multiple issues. And typically the fundamental issue, at least the typical weakest link that I see across all major attacks in businesses, unfortunately, is the human element. This is sort of the weakest link, and it's no one's fault. It's kind of, we are humans and we are trained to sort of do things very quickly with not all the information. And that's kind of the consistent thing I see in most attacks. There were some other things that we saw, for example, a really weak password that was used for one of the services in order to actually get in. So that's one of the areas that we saw with SolarWinds. So with Twitter, this was essentially a targeted social engineering attack. So specific administrators who had the privilege that would be useful to the Twitter attackers were targeted, and it was, I believe, they were taken to essentially a fake administrative page where they were then entering information. So it was another targeted attack to humans.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you bring up that human element so quickly. It seems like we have moved from attackers hacking machines very much to attackers hacking people. What is it about people that you think attackers are, like, what is it that draws attackers to people? Is it their vulnerabilities? Are people too busy? Are they generally trusting? Like, what is about the human psyche that makes them vulnerable to attackers?
I think there's an interesting book I read many years ago by Robert Cialdini called Influence. And it talks about how humans can be influenced to do things. And it gives really good examples of social proof, for example. I'll just give this one example where many people were standing outside of a bank. So people believed that the bank was getting shut down, and people started going into the bank and then closing their accounts. And throughout the day, the bank had to shut down. And really, the bus was late. So there were people collecting outside of here because the bus didn't make it on time, but people just made an assumption. So we see other people doing something, so we do that same thing, right? It's a simple mechanism for us to just have a good idea. Like, we see two restaurants next to each other. One is really packed, one is 0 people. You're not going to go to the one with 0 people. You just don't trust it. You didn't actually evaluate anything yourself. You're using information that you gleaned from other things without any personal evaluation. And that's okay. We don't have time to evaluate every little thing. So we use these cues to help us move through our days relatively quickly. And I think it's those cues, if you can understand what those elements are, that's a way that you can exploit people, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's interesting that I've also read that book. I think it's a great book. And I think it's interesting that you talk about, the trusting nature, but equally in the introduction, you raised something which, it's 2021 and you mentioned password hygiene. Kind of, yes, people are trusting in nature, but shouldn't technology be doing more? Why are we still talking about password hygiene? Why is it so difficult for enterprises to just mean, we often say no one thinks about spam anymore. Spam is a solved problem. Why is things like password hygiene? I swear I was told about password hygiene when I was 10 years old. Like, why are enterprises still struggling with the basics?
Well, I have to say, just from personal experience, I know I'm supposed to use strong passwords, and I still use some weak passwords somewhere. If it's something important, I've been attacked enough that I know I need to use really good passwords or a password manager. I'm a little more paranoid, so I use an encrypted disk to store my passwords. But I think we're human. We don't want to have to, it's like studying for a test. No one wants to study for a test. And it's like remembering a hard password. To me, it's kind of like studying for a test, right? I have to either remember this thing or I have to put it somewhere that's really inconvenient. And I don't like inconvenience and I don't like studying. So I think if you take those two elements, even though I know it's good for me, just like I know it's good for me to eat my vegetables every day, I'm not always going to do it. So hopefully we can find mechanisms that add that convenience, like a password manager, or help me eat my vegetables, like mixing it into my Fruit Loops, or other ways to prevent these types of attacks that don't actually impact me as a human and the conveniences that I like.
Yeah, and I guess we've mentioned two organizations, and there's obviously many attacks and that go on throughout the year. So not focusing too much on SolarWinds and Twitter, but I imagine both of these organizations took training and awareness pretty seriously, and running security programs, training programs, and then we're also talking about password hygiene. What role does training have, and is it fit for purpose today, and does it reflect the real risk that's out there? And maybe how can our audience think about running these training programs to actually address the risk that's out there versus maybe, I don't know, fake training that people are bored with, it's not engaging, and it's not reflecting their day-to-day business? I wonder if you have any comments on that.
Yeah, I think I've changed my opinion on this over time. In the past, I thought everything should be automated. We shouldn't have the human decide anything. But I've learned over time and building businesses that we don't have time to implement every possible safeguard that exists ever. We just don't. So what can we do in the limited time that we do have? And I found that training is an effective way to reduce the likelihood of someone falling for new things, especially when we're finding new types of attacks. Like I'm seeing new types of attacks through email that are occurring. And I'm saying, okay, well, it's going to take me way too long to actually implement a system to prevent that, or I need to find a service that can do that. However, if I also can train people additionally, then they're less likely to enter their password on a web page that looks fishy. Maybe they will just remember that little element of nugget of information.
Yeah, we talk a lot at Tessian about kind of training being this really good baseline foundation for everything else to build off. And
makes sense.
I'm very hopeful that we can keep pushing the boundaries of training and awareness and making it more engaging, letting people really engage with the material, care about the material, understand why they might not have security in their title, but it's still important for them to do their best work. It's still important for that company to achieve its mission. And I still think it's a very positive message. I still think there's so much more we can do with getting that foundation layer of training and awareness right. I think another thing that we heard about with the Twitter attack is that Twitter had MFA rolled out for the majority of the sensitive users who had access, yet due to the type of attack, they were able to bypass the MFA. I think it's a common misconception within enterprise that MFA just is 100% foolproof. And of course, let's implement it everywhere we can. We should be implementing MFA, but I wonder if you could just tell the audience about, maybe why MFA isn't going to make you 100% safe all the time. Especially, I believe the Twitter attack was kind of phone impersonation, sending people to administrator pages, etc.
Yeah, I'll just give it a simple example. I think MFA is great, but here's a simple example where it breaks down for a lot of people. If you're on a website and you believe you're on the legitimate version of a website, maybe I'm logging to my email, and I know my email every, I don't know, month, 2 months, randomly it asks me for an MFA. I'm like, all right, so I go and I log in and I'm like, oh, what's my MFA? It looks legit. I look at my Authenticator app or whatever app I'm using, or I receive an SMS, which is much worse. Don't prefer not to use SMS, but I use the app and I type it in, and now the attackers have it and automatically authenticate. And now they have a cookie or they have a session details where they actually do that because I, as the user, I was the weak link. I revealed. If I'm going to reveal my username and password, of course, I'm going to also reveal my MFA code.
Yeah, no, it's a really simple example. And actually, one of the beautiful things about password managers, the side benefit is it can actually highlight, these fake websites because it doesn't autofill. And I think it's one of the really good things about password managers is you can use it as a proxy as, hang on a minute, Google normally always autofills with my password manager, but it's not doing it on this site. Hang on a minute, maybe there's something weird going on here. So just before we end, sorry, just to cut you off because we are coming to time. In a post-SolarWinds world, do you have any advice? And you've mentioned, humans often are the weakest link. Like, what should enterprises do differently if the current approach isn't necessarily always working?
Yeah, nothing is perfect. I think and being in a business myself and seeing new attacks every single day, I think it's implementing different types of systems. We need automated systems that can prevent new attacks that are occurring. We need services who are actually staying on top of this stuff, who can implement these. I believe now we need to train users. And I think it's helpful just to communicate to users, hey, you may not have, let's say, the keys to the kingdom. You may not have API keys or database access. But if you look at these other massive attacks, things like Sony, for example, or Target, these are not administrative users. These are maybe lower level company users who just had access to the network, right? They had some low level access that gave attackers enough. So this does actually impact everyone. So I think we don't have time to evaluate every little thing, just like why someone didn't go into a restaurant. So the more systems that we can use that can reduce that overhead, I think is really helpful to us, at least personally.
Great. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Sammy. So very much a multifaceted approach, but also putting people at the center of that kind of security program. I love that. Okay, perfect. Well, Sammy, that was brief, but very valuable. Thanks so much for joining us and telling us how we can level up our own enterprise security strategy. To everyone who joined us, thanks for tuning in. Make sure you share your favorite insights on Twitter and LinkedIn with hashtag Human Layer Security Summit.
Security and IT teams are still working hard to shake off the perception of being dubbed the no team. Up next, learn how fintech company Go Cardless won over their entire organization, from employees to board members, with their forward-thinking data loss prevention program. We'll look at how they combined intuitive user warnings, powerful analytics, and reporting tools to help prove their business case and ultimately make the security team enablers, not blockers.
Thanks, Kelly, and welcome, everyone. I'm Henry, and for today's session, I'm joined by Punit from Go Cardless, a customer of ours who we've learned so much from over the last 6 months or so. Today, we're specifically going to learn how they revamped their DLP strategy and won over their execs and employees along the way. Now, DLP and happy employees are two phrases that often aren't heard together. So really looking forward to digging deeper in today's session. Punit, first up, perhaps we can hand over to you for a quick introduction to yourself and also your role at Go Cardless.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Henry. Sorry, excuse me. Hi, everyone. I'm Punit. I'm the head of business systems and IT at Go Cardless. I've been here just over a year, joined at the crazy pandemic time. So it's been an interesting year plus. Prior to Go Cardless, is at WeWork and Uber. So clearly love like the hot startup journey and putting in cool tools. Go Cardless is in the space solving for payments. So whether that's recurring or one-time payments, we've just really done some really cool stuff with them. And banking, you should check it out. We service payments across 30 different countries, and we process about 20 billion in revenue for our merchants every year.
Thanks, Punit. A really helpful overview, and yeah, a lot of data to protect there. I'd love to start with where your starting point was in DLP. DLP can be a really daunting project, I think, for many to tackle, whether it be unwinding legacy rule sets, assessing user disruption, and just investing a lot of time in figuring out how you're going to implement that project going forward. At Go Cardless, what was your starting state with DLP?
Yeah, I think I'd say boring and daunting, right? Like it's one of those things that it's just kind of there and can be disruptive to users. So I guess our starting point was like I said, it was kind of just there. We used Google DLP to kick off with and the inbuilt DLP tools. And we found those like a little bit, I'd say, complex to configure. So we're coming to this realization before like everything just, and we'll talk about this further, like everything just happened and we went to market to look for somebody better, is we realized we need an admin of its own. It's just configure a bunch of policies that just block stuff for our users all the time. And that didn't seem very like user in mind. So I'd say that's our starting point, is Google-based DLP tools, bit boring, bit daunting, like you've said, and just there.
Yeah, I think also in a fast growth company like Go Cardless, you can't afford for things just to be there because they get in the way of doing business. The other thing that I think was a really good point is traditional DLP is revolved around someone having to constantly configure and assess rules, and then ultimately you're introducing human error into the equation, because it's like, how well does that person know the entire problems of your entire user base? What was it that instigated you guys to start thinking about, okay, we need a new approach?
Yeah, I think we needed an approach in the first place. So we had an incident where somebody sent a file to a friend instead of to the right recipient. And we got a bit lucky where the friend said, oh, did you really mean to send me this file? And it was an important file that probably shouldn't have gone to the friend. And you know, the person in Syntec caught that and came straight to us and said, hey, like, do we have a way of stopping me from sending things I shouldn't to the wrong people? And we're like, maybe let's go and have a look at it. So we weren't like intentionally looking at DLP, but it's one of these things where it allows us to be user-led as well. So users will come into us with a problem and going, hey, I've made this stupid mistake. What should I do? And can you do anything to help me not make that mistake again? So that's what really led us down the road of going, we should look at this problem. We should look at inbound and outbound DLP and see if we can make it easy for our users not to do things that are going to be harmful to them in the business.
I love that. To have employees not just saying, self-reporting, like, hey, this has happened, but how can we stop this going forward is really powerful. How have you got your employees to that state where they're actually coming forward and saying, hey, how can we stop it going forward?
Yeah, I think it's part of that kind of scale-up workforce culture, right, where people are expecting not to do things by themselves constantly. If you look at all aspects of mostly business systems and IT, there's a huge focus today on automation and self-service. So people are used to working in organizations where you're not having to report things, you're not being blocked by things, you're really being enabled to just get on with your work. And the expectation is that IT teams and business teams and security teams are becoming more and more self-service and putting the control in the hands of the users. And that just really allows people to not worry about these things and just get on and just be productive and work.
Yeah, that's awesome. It also, I think, creates a really strong tie between the security team and your users, because it feels like it's one team who's trying to achieve one thing, rather than security team trying to lock down users to prevent data leakage, which isn't their problem.
Yeah, I think there's this legacy kind of, sorry, Henry. I think there's this legacy kind of perception of security blocks everything. And I think in this instance where it's not security doesn't block anything. We've given the control to the users and the users decide what is right and what is wrong.
Yeah, completely agree. I think also in working environments like Go Cardless, and I've got friends who work at Go Cardless and rave about it as a company, you can't afford to lock people down, because it's such an empowering environment for people to work and act like business owners, that security can't just go against that ethos, because it kind of undermines what you're doing as an organization.
Yeah, I'd say like even when we're attracting talent, one of the things we look at is letting people know that it is a company and a culture where you're empowered and enabled to get on with work and do what you think is right.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And love to see that being reflected in the security strategy as well. Perhaps going on to kind of Tessian and what you were looking for when you set out on that journey of finding a security partner, and maybe a little bit about some of the work that you've been doing with Tessian around plugging these gaps and data loss prevention.
Yeah, so when we went looking for the right partner, I think the things that were front of mind were whatever we chose had to be easy to use, had to be easy to implement, had to be easy to administer. So I was managing a small team last year, so it couldn't be anything that required tons and tons of work for my team to implement. It couldn't be something that required tons and tons of documentation to be written. It couldn't be something that required huge amounts of user training. It had to be quick, easy to use, quick to deploy, easy to deploy. A lot of support from the vendor would be required to get it out if we needed that support. Had to be self-serviceable, had to be really, really intuitive. So that's our approach to how we were looking for the right partner. And sorry, I'm going to ask you to repeat the second part of your question. I missed a bit of that.
No, I was going to say, maybe like an extension of that, that's what you were looking for. How's the experience been in terms of the work that you've started doing with the Tessian platform and how that's changed your perception of what DLP looks like?
Yeah, I think it actually hit the nail on the head, right? Like with Tessian, it's like I said, it's just going to sound a bit repetitive now, self-service, intuitive, where people are looking at data loss prevention. I've got a really good quote actually from one of our sales team that they shouted out saying, "Hey, I just wanted to give you kudos for implementing Tessian security. Saved me from an awkward conversation." So our users are looking at where they should have maybe BCC'd somebody or not BCC'd somebody or chose the right salutation or chosen the right name. And they're coming back to us and saying, "Hey, that product you've put in is really awesome." And they are now thinking about data loss prevention versus just it being driven through security and IT.
I love that quote. I think it all comes down to the fact that data loss prevention is not a technology problem, it's a human problem. And when you implement the right solutions, it has a real material impact on employees. And whether that be an employee feeling less bad when they do something because Tessian is going to warn them. I think for so long, DLP has fallen into this tricky spot of hundreds of man hours to deploy. Once it's deployed, you fall, it's like a sunk cost fallacy that you don't want to make a change until you need to make a change, which is a dangerous position to be in because it requires a breach to happen before you need to make that change. So yeah, having users at the front of it is just such a great way to overcome that and make, as I said, a human problem, not a technology problem. I'd love to go a bit deeper on the user part because I think it's a really key part of your philosophy. And we talk about how you won users over. How was the feedback initially when you implemented with users? How did you garner that feedback and how did it change their perception of what security controls can be like?
Yeah, I think I'd say overwhelmingly there was a positive response to our deployment of Tessian at the business. People, especially the exec team, were coming to us quite quickly and saying, "Hey, this is really cool. We're going to stop data leakage. We were able to catch a couple of incidents that we maybe wouldn't have otherwise." So overwhelmingly, there was this really, really positive response to, "Hey, this tool's really awesome. I didn't know we could do this kind of stuff." Where, for example, I went to send this email, Tessian sends me an email back saying, "Did you really mean to send that email?" Right? Well, like I said, with the Google DLP tools, things were just being blocked in this black hole and nobody knew their emails were being blocked, whether that was inbound or outbound. So there was more visibility for the users on what was actually going on. And I think it kind of gave the users more of an education on this is what we perceive as risk and this is what we don't perceive as risk, right? So that was really cool. I think I'd say on the feedback that where we could have done a bit better is obviously salespeople are constantly going out and sending a ton of emails, and they are probably more prone to making bad, I won't say bad choices, but wrong salutations, wrong names in emails, wrong BCCs, or being recognized as spam. So on the former, it was quite positive feedback. And that's a quote I just read you was from a salesperson, right? They were really, really grateful that we'd got them out of some awkward conversations of sending, I don't know, Henry's email to Karina or Karina's email to Henry by mistake, right? But they were also coming back to us with, hey, a lot of the emails I actually do want to send are being blocked. What do I do? I think when you talk about ease of use and ease of administration, it was really easy for us to set up a user group within Tessian that said, stop these people from being caught so aggressively and tone the filter down. And, the salespeople would just be able to then get on with their job. So, yeah, that I think that summarizes quite well the feedback we got within the business.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love the way as well that the security team then can be seen as, not just implementing non-obtrusive solutions, but removing blockers really quickly. And as you said, it goes on to like this enablement part as well. One of the big things that we see coming back in customer feedback is that the way that Tessian, and I would say like broadly like a machine intelligent approach to security, where it relies on behavioral intelligence models, understanding behavior, surfacing the right information at the right time. The way that it does that can create really what we call positive security moments and like reinforce a security culture. How do you guys think about fostering that security culture and reinforcing a security culture across the organization? And then what role does, I guess, like Tessian play in that broader strategy?
I'd say I think if you start with removing the negative perception, right, and the negative connotations associated with security often has a big brother, we're looking at everything kind of perception within businesses. And the role Tessian's played at Go Cardless into changing that perception is, I'm going to say this again, like putting the power in the hands of the users. I think I've said that about 4 times today, right?
No, we love it.
We are not. We are not being seen as the people that are watching. We are not being seen as the people that are big brothering. We are not being seen as the people that are blocking things, right? I think it's as a user within the business, because I get told what I'm doing, I know somebody else is not watching. And the communication piece and the user story behind that is, hey, you are enabled to do what you want and we trust you to get on with your work and do all the right things. And if you don't do the right thing, then, hey, we're going to tell you you're not doing the right thing. And then if you still choose to do the wrong thing, then that's a different conversation, right? So it totally changes the perception of security from a big brother, a monitoring kind of team to we enable you to get on with your work, but we're also watching from afar because you get 2 chances to say no. And then if you still say yes, then there are consequences.
That is a different conversation, yeah. I think it's very like timely as well. I think it's a great approach and very timely with everything that's happened over the last 18 months, year or so, where empowerment has to become more central to how we manage our workforces. Like with people no longer in the offices, you have to entrust that they're doing the right thing, that they're working in a more empowered way. And I think having security kind of reinforce that is a really powerful way to kind of like hit home with users. Now, Punet, for a technology leader, I love the way that you speak so much about the user impact and the user stories. I think it's really rare, and I think it's why we've really connected working together over the last 6 months or so. Would love to come on to your team more and the IT team and security teams and the impact that implementing Tessian as your new DLP solution has had on your security teams. What has it meant for their day-to-day?
Easy. They're not doing like really boring, repetitive things like watching what's going on, right? There's this previous world where you're spending a ton of time configuring complex rules, and there's this previous world where you're constantly having to flag people to be watched, or you're having to monitor certain mailboxes, or you're having to monitor certain activities and drive what's going on in Google Drive. With Tessian, it's allowed us to not have to do that anymore, right? Which is like there's less noise. We're only looking at what we really need to look at. So we're not looking at everything. We have that nice integration into Splunk, which alerts us and monitors and alerts us on all the relevant things. We're not like Tessian's configuring itself for us with the AA, right? So we're not having to constantly update rules, change rules, configure rules based on user behavior. Tessian's doing that by itself for us. So we're spending more time thinking of the art of the possible with Tessian and what could be done. What's next? Like I talk to you all the time, Henry, about like what are you doing for DLP next? What are you doing for DLP next? And it allows us to think outside the box and those things versus do low value repetitive work, which really doesn't provide much value back to the business.
Yeah, I love that. It's almost like this concept of the SOC teams, security teams, IT teams can be way more proactive with how they're thinking about removing those pains from the business and, like building towards their strategy. And at the end of the day, like, the people that you employ, and I know this because we've worked closely with them, are highly skilled individuals, and they should be used for highly skilled work rather than trawling through loads of logs, which may not be relevant. And of course, when you go into that realm as well, like there's always the opportunity for human error. And we want to make people's lives easier by saying, hey, here are the things that you really care about. And then they can focus on actually remediating those things rather than like just identifying them in the first place. How's that changed your team's perception of kind of like where they can focus their time? So let's say they like identify specific issues that Tessian has alerted to them through Splunk or through certain automated notifications. Where does that mean that they can then spend their time in terms of like remediating it? And, does that mean they spend more time in building a better relationship with the business because they're focusing on things that the business know are important?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things, right? Because there's less noise, what's coming in needs a lot more attention and diligence. So we're being able to be more focused on the things that are actually coming in through Splunk, and we know that actual incidents versus there's a really low rate of false flags. So we know that whatever we're getting is real, right? There's no bad noise around it. I think the other thing it allows is outside of the stuff Tessian flags to us, there's this real opportunity so we're always trying to do more with less, right? So it's how much more work can we do without having to hire linearly? And what this really allows us to do is, because there's less noise coming in, we can spend more time working on the things that should actually require our time and dedication. So real incidents outside of DLP, real security breaches incidents, endpoint incidents, any other security issues, they can spend time and focusing on those and really digging deep into how to make those problems go away versus dealing with noise that was coming in previously.
Yeah, awesome. So users get more empowered, your kind of like SOC teams have saved time and they're focusing on like the more impactful issues. I'd love to go on to like reporting and how you play that narrative internally and ultimately like, how you make yourself and your teams look good for implementing something like this and use that to drive better exec engagement in terms of future risks that you need to solve for. Firstly, like how do you use the Tessian data to communicate the business value of not just Tessian, but like solving for those specific risks that you solve for?
Yeah, I think there's two parts, right? How do we use the data for training, and how do we use the data to report back to the business, right? So on the training piece, that's a really interesting piece for us is it allows a lot of the data, all of the data we get from Tessian really tells us where our problems are. And if you look at the, you're going to correct me on the term, but I think it's a human layer risk hub. With that, it tells us it's a nice cheers, mate. It's a nice diagram that tells us how people are scoring within the business in different elements of security and data loss, right? Now, the nice thing about that is I don't have to go to the whole business and say everybody needs to get better at looking out for phishing attempts, or everybody needs to get better at not sending bad emails out, or bad salutations or bad information to the wrong people. It's really targeted. So I can say these 10 people need training in stop clicking on malicious links, and these 15 people need better education on how to send outbound emails. It means our audience is a lot more engaged with the training, because if you sit through training that you've already received and it's not a problem area for you, you're normally going to switch off and it's wasting your time and our time. So our user training is a lot more directed and not prescriptive, I can't think of the right words today, a lot more effective for that user audience. So I think that's a massive win for us. And it means our security team are spending a lot more time doing the right things for the business, right? I think from a reporting data perspective, it also allows us to highlight and identify what the real risk is. There's a world we used to live in where we'd say, oh, we need to work on DLP, or we need to work on phishing attempts, or we need to work on outbound emails or data exfiltration. Now, with the data that Tessian gives us, we can see how much of a real threat versus perceived threat that is, and go back to our execs and ask for the right resources and the time to address the right problems.
Yeah, awesome. I want to take both of those in turn because I think there's some really great points made. Firstly, you're right. For so long, security awareness training is like one size fits all. Let's apply these modules of training to everyone and expect them to be really engaged. But that's not how it works. And when you can focus on the employees that actually need that training and are going to be receptive to it because they know that it's going to help them as well, it becomes way more impactful. And I love the way that you use the human layer risk hub and our risk scoring to identify where to focus. It's increasingly where we're seeing like Tessian kind of like help our employees when it comes to user training. And then from an exec perspective, I think completely agree. They want to see like the business impact, which then gives you the buy-in to go and solve these other problems. In terms of, what we've seen some customers do is actually use examples of breaches that have been prevented, employee education events that have occurred through Tessian, and play that back to the business to say like, hey guys, it happens to everyone, but we're working to stop it together to create that more like positive security culture, get people thinking about this, and also normalize the fact that this stuff happens, but we have systems in place to help us. Have you guys ever considered anything like that when it comes to training users and actually playing back to them real world examples?
Yeah, I think we do that all the time. I think actually the magic has been that because the users are being educated through Tessian, right? Like this should have happened or this shouldn't have happened for this reason. It means we're training less on, hey, this is the data we've got, this is what we should do, and more on the story we're able to tell is because of Tessian, we've seen a reduction in the number of, bad acts, bad outbound emails, bad inbound emails that actually been actioned that shouldn't have been actioned. So I think actually our story, I feel, is a little bit more powerful in that we're not going back and using the data to say, oh, more and more of this is happening, we should focus here. We're spending a lot of time going less and less of this is happening because of Tessian. This is why Tessian is a really good investment for us.
Yeah, awesome. I love it. I think, when we look at old DLP of, policy-based controls versus highly relevant behavioral intelligence suggestions from something like Tessian, I think the big difference is that previously someone will see a warning and they won't know why it applies to them because, they don't know the keyword that the policy is looking for. So they tend to ignore it. Whereas when Tessian surfaces something, your users are smart and your users know the importance of data security. And when something that is very relevant is flagged to them and they say like, oh, yeah, you know what, that's a good catch. What a great reminder in the moment. It becomes a really, really powerful training event. And as I said, like a positive security culture reinforcer. I think we're coming up to time, Punit, but it's been awesome to hear how you guys have gone about revamping your DLP strategy and not just through empowering users, but reducing time for your SOC team and then also playing that value back to execs. Really appreciate you taking the time to chat to us today. Looking forward to continue to working with you guys going forward. And thank you very much.
For our next speakers, user behavior is at the very heart of their security decision-making. I'm delighted to invite to the virtual stage two CISOs, Katrina and Ian, of two major financial services enterprises, Intertrust Group and Schroders Personal Wealth. They're here to share how they use Tessian warnings to empower their employees to make secure decisions on email, and how they use Tessian analytics to show exactly how that employee behavior improves over time.
Thank you, Kelly. I am Robin Savage, Customer Success Lead here at Tessian, and it's now time to hear from two more of our customers on some incredibly important topics. Firstly, how to stop human error breaches by treating employees as part of the solution. And secondly, how to translate that progress back to senior management in a way that really resonates. Now, Katrina and Ian, who you'll meet in just a moment, are both brilliant CISOs who are always coming to us with new and interesting ideas for how we can keep evolving Tessian's technology to tackle new challenges. So it's fantastic to have them both here with us today, and I think we should get right to some introductions.
Thanks, Robin. My name is Katrina Sibinovska. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer of Intertrust Group. We're a publicly listed company that provides a wide range of services in the financial sector to clients operating across the footprint of all continents, pretty much. So the headquarters is in Amsterdam, but we have more than 44 offices across the world.
Hi, I'm Ian Bishop-Laggett. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer of Schroders Personal Wealth. Schroders Personal Wealth is a joint venture between Lloyds Banking and Schroders itself. And we were set up in 2019 to take on the personal wealth advising business out of Lloyds. And it's pretty much a startup with the engine running. And we've had to build out our entire infrastructure as a greenfield site. And it's been quite challenging and really enjoyable.
Love that. Thank you both. And Ian, you're skipping over your extensive history with Tessian before. We're talking to a Tessian veteran, having seen us from the ground up at Schroders too. So lots of interesting perspectives on this one. And I think it's going to bring loads of really sort of important insight to today's discussion. So the first topic I'm going to start us off with today is thinking about this notion of factoring human behavior into security design. Now, I think before we do that, what's really important is we step back and we actually lay out what are the human risks that we're trying to mitigate. So Ian, perhaps I come to you first here. Which human risks are your top priority at SBW to be sort of protecting against? You know, if we skip the jargon, what keeps you up at night as a CISO?
I think it's common amongst most companies is that a phishing attack and subsequently somebody clicking on a phishing email is the biggest thing. We can do an awful lot to help mitigate against that through security awareness training, but we know through testing that there are still a number of people that click on well-crafted phishing attacks, and therefore we have to have the defenses and the recovery and response mechanism in place to be able to cope with that. The second big thing is sending the wrong data to the wrong people. That has to be one of the second biggest worries, and again, putting in software that helps provide guardrails is my mantra in that area. But two probably biggest worries are human related.
Brilliant. And then Katerina, if we come to you next, I don't mean to add to the stress, but what's keeping you up at night?
Well, I can actually relate to what Ian just mentioned. And if we look at what's happening on the market, it's clear that the number of phishing emails and ransomware attacks and spear phishing are growing, right? And today the focus has shifted from office work to remote work as well. Everybody's working from home these days, so some of the risks that were not present 2 years ago, they're now becoming a top priority. So if I have to, choose one as the top risk that keeps me awake at night, I think that would be data exfiltration or data loss, if you will. And how does that relate to human is because, sometimes one click is all it takes, right? And I'm not saying that this is necessarily a malicious behavior, but it can also be because of lack of awareness or knowledge or just negligence or, the casual behavior, like you read something in the news and then you say, well, this is not something that can happen to me. And yeah, that would be the biggest risk that I see. And even lack of some technology solution these days to protect the remote work. Because as I mentioned, we were all looking at the office as a space, but now some of the focus has shifted. And humans are the weakest link, I think.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting what you referenced there and extremely pertinent, right, in that we think of bad actors. They're few and far between. We obviously have to be extremely intentional in the way that we protect for them. But ultimately, they're a rarer beast, right? Whereas the majority of our workforce are well-intentioned, hard-working people who have plenty on their plate, and as a result, sometimes mistakes happen, and that is probably the bulk of instances in which you two are having to design programs to mitigate against.
Correct.
Now, exactly. What I think would be really interesting, and Katrina, I'm going to pick up on you first here, because we had a very interesting discussion about this a few weeks ago, around this notion of putting users at the center of the strategy that you put in place in order to mitigate for these risks. Now, Katerina, I remember something you said to me when I asked you this question before, and you laughed. You went, well, Robin, I am a user. So sometimes the policies that I put in place restrict me, and that's just how I think of it. Maybe you could talk a bit more about how that mindset governs your work as CISO. I think it's such an interesting idea.
Well, look, our entire information security strategy has a human-centered concept. And human security by design, it puts the user at the center of the attention. And as I mentioned, I know I try to do what's best for the company. At the same time, I know sometimes it slows me down as a user as well. But we have to make sure that we keep the correct balance between security and business continuity. We have an entire pillar of the information security strategy that we call security culture. And it's all about training and education and raising that awareness. I can't say that we can, allow to 100% rely on people being aware and know what they're doing. So we also invest in technology just to add that additional layer of protection, so that it's a nice combination of technical and non-technical controls. But that doesn't mean, you put some advanced threat protection tools and you block the malicious links. That doesn't mean people can just relax and they click everywhere. They still have to be vigilant, and that's the message that we're trying to spread. Because at the end of the day, I think the price of excellence is the ultimate vigilance.
Super interesting. And Ian, I know that translates very naturally to your own perspective on sort of empowering staff as opposed to seeing them as part of the risk. Maybe you could speak about how at SBW you think in a sort of similar line.
Yeah, so I'm completely aligned to what Katerina says there. It's about, we know people make mistakes. That's the first thing. So having systems in place that help mitigate those mistakes is great. Tessian being one of those systems. What I'm really keen on is the security, the constant security awareness. So we're running video campaigns, which I think is a really good medium for delivering security awareness messages, and we're complementing that with frequent phishing testing. And the phishing testing, I like the carrot approach rather than the stick approach to phishing testing. The idea is to place various types of emails, and we know that all of us here could probably craft a really good email that will fool our boss into doing something. It's not too tricky, but by putting in front of them various emails that we know are currently being used by attackers, and crafting them, we're hoping that we increase the number of people that spot them first of all, and therefore are the first reporters, because somebody reporting an email early on in their in the attack can help us remove it from everybody else and prevent the person that perhaps isn't quite paying attention that day from clicking it. But the other really important thing is we don't go after people who've clicked on emails. We know people make mistakes, and what we want to do is to give them some immediate training that's fun, that's interesting, that's engaging. It doesn't become a chore to do, and in that way we can see what we have seen through our results. Phishing clicks reducing drastically, and phishing reporting getting to a level which is really good for the company, and still improving month by month. And I think by doing those immediate trainings for the people that fail, they immediately know what they did wrong, rather than a week later or 2 weeks later coming back saying, you clicked on a phishing email, now you're in trouble, which is just the wrong culture, in my mind, to spread through a company.
Katrina, I can see you smiling, and I know that's because this is a topic that resonates very strongly with your own sort of thinking at Intertrust. I think for me also what I'm hearing from Ian is it's this idea of ongoing training, right? Training is not an isolated activity that you give someone something once and then we have to expect that in every single instance in their working day they remember every single piece of content that you disseminated, both from the phishing standpoint but also actually on the data exploitation side or the accidental data loss side. Does that resonate with the sort of creative ways in which you're thinking about security training at Intertrust as well?
Absolutely. I mean, learning can only be effective if it's ongoing activity, right? So when we create, we try to stay stay relevant. So we have like annual awareness program, and when we create this awareness program, we also look at the continuity as an aspect. It's not something that you can do in one quarter, then tick the box and the job's done. It is an ongoing process where you have to, and people don't want to be told always that they have to do something. So it's about finding smart ways how to sometimes also bring it from the back door. And we thought that by having something around security every month, it is going to help, and not necessarily has to be a heavy security content that it's time consuming. We have those as well. So for example, we use October as the security awareness month, but some other months, it's the small things that make a difference, right? We'd get 10 minutes of air time in the local town hall to talk about security risks. Try to make it relatable to people. Trying to use like use cases, because that's what gets their attention. Sometimes, send a 5-10 minute short quiz and what Ian mentioned that has the carrot, like a smart symbolic award. People like these things. And it's like through fun ways that can also, ensure that continuity. But then again, the management support. We're trying to also train the trainer so that I think that people copy leadership behavior, and if that voice is coming from the top, it also helps. So we're always asking the local heads and the MDs to also speak about security, talk to their MT, put security at the discussion table, and that does make a difference.
Absolutely. And then Ian, if we sort of look at that from the Tessian perspective and the sort of in the moment prompts that you have been deploying to users in order to complement that ongoing work stream, can you talk about how you sort of see those two in conjunction and what the in the moment warnings are there to really focus on?
Yeah, I mean, certainly from the defender position and putting up the spear phishing email. So once something's got through our defenses and got all the way to the desktop, our colleagues are the last line of defense. So by putting up a warning in front of them that this email looks suspicious, this looks like a spear phishing attempt, and why, which is the big important thing, because that's where the education comes. It's provided, it's invaluable. From a point of view of the data exfiltration or the mistakes happening, the Guardian warnings, which are the pure AI based warnings that pop up when you've accidentally put the wrong John in your email, is a great double check. And quite honestly, nobody seems to mind getting the occasional warning, and it really is occasional. And I can see from how people have responded that they've seen again the explanation of why it's warned, and that's so important. It's no good just popping up a message saying don't do this, as Katrina just said. The explanation is where the education happens, and being told was you've emailed somebody that's very similar to somebody inside never bothers anybody, and occasionally it does pick up a true misdirected email, which is fantastic to see.
Yeah, super interesting, because it's not about stepping up and saying, oh, you've done something wrong, this is an error. it's, as you say, sort of educating people as to why it is that contextually what they were doing in that moment might lead to something dangerous. And Katerina, maybe if we focus on the sort of outbound piece, given the way in which Intertrust focus, when you decided with your different sort of policy changes, whether that was the warning messages or the block messages, how did you sort of measure that step change in behavior and sort of report that more widely? I think it's a really interesting story.
Look, Tessian is a very powerful tool. We use it to look also how users behavior with emails, right? By nature of our business, we deal with a huge volume of sensitive and confidential data. Even management loves it, right? Because we put the Tessian dashboard in one of our reporting, and then they see some numbers that put things into perspective, and then it helps them take sound decisions. So when we put the Tessian warnings, the overall feedback was very positive. Some users loved it immediately. Some users were not entirely clear what Tessian does for them at the beginning. It's a change, so you need to take the time for that change to be embedded in the culture. But once you put it into perspective, we notice the warnings, they first trigger like, oh, what is happening and I'm doing something wrong. And then you explain what Tessian does for them, and then it gives them that level of comfort. Now, think about this. We have business users that are working on a tight client deadlines and meeting high demands, and it's stressful. They're sending a lot of emails. I think we use emails even too much sometimes. And if we only tell users they always have to triple check every time they press send, that adds additional level of stress that they might make a mistake, and then that confidential information will end up in the wrong hands. What happens in that cases, I think that mistakes are imminent. But if you tell them that there is something in the background that can help them and warns them that, look, are you sure you want to send this email because you're sending it to the wrong recipient? You might be sending it. That gives them a little bit of a more relaxed way. And I really believe people are more efficient when they're less stressed when doing that job in general. So Tessian, how we see it, it's like it has our back. It prevents you from making a mistake that can have like a massive impact for the company. So it's always to know that something or someone has your back. So the overall feedback was super positive. When we moved from warning to block mode of people sending emails to personal email boxes, I think we were one of the first Tessian clients who did that. We expected a bigger pushback, to be honest. And of course, we had some false positives at the beginning, but they get it. Eventually we just say, look, you shouldn't be sending emails to your personal email boxes. That's against policies. And how the behavior changed is that we were monitoring, the top 5 people that had the biggest volume of emails. And then we would go and educate. The same names would never appear in the same report, in the report next week. So, yeah. It helped.
Shows it's resonating. Exactly.
Yeah.
And actually you strike on something really interesting there, in that it's ultimately your organizational culture and how you decide to configure. So block was correct for you in that moment, whereas Ian, I know at the moment you guys are using warnings as more of a nudge because that matches up better to the sort of mantra and process that you have in place at SBW. Perhaps as a sort of final piece on this one, you both talked a lot about how the user sees the different warnings and how they get used to that. Ian, perhaps could you talk a little bit more about how you translate that value back to senior management in order for them to understand why it's necessary for you to have this program in place beyond that just sort of individual user reaction at the sort of aggregate level?
Yes, I think it's really good for our senior management to see parts of this. But what I try and do is to roll everything together into, I think your wish may come true in a moment. You'll see why. Yes, to roll everything together into the reporting. So it's not just the results of Tessian responses to emails, etc., but it's also how the phishing stats have worked and how they've integrated and how we've seen differences in reporting and when we see the security awareness messages coming out, trying to merge all that together to produce a coherent a vision of how well we're doing as a security culture. And I know that's always been a really tough thing to measure and to show to senior management the security culture of a company. But when we can show that phishing clicking rates are going down and phishing clicking rates are going, reporting rates are going up significantly, we can see that reductions. We do allow people to send personal emails home, but they justify it. So there's a little challenge there. So if somebody's perhaps doubtful whether what they're doing is legitimate, they get a little prompt to say it, and we do follow up if our scanning of those results shows anything that we want to follow up on. So it's not just one thing that we try and show senior management. It's trying to pull all that detail together, and by showing the number of accidental email that have been prevented, which is a great thing that Tessian shows us, almost justifies Tessian in its own right. But showing that in context against the number of emails that are sent every month gives you an idea of what sort of error rate we're dealing with, and what sort of, as I say, that baseline culture. And that's the thing that I'm trying to get across to the senior management is just, where is our culture going? Are people engaging in the security awareness? Are they getting worse or better at phishing emails? And also, what type of emails cause people are the worst ones? So the ones that often impersonate Microsoft type messages are really difficult. Sometimes you look at those and you think, actually, that looks really absolutely real. Even the email address looks real, and yet it's been caught. It's really quite good. So it's a combination of things. It's not just one aspect.
Makes complete sense. And then, also, as a security professional, if you think an attack looks convincing, God forbid someone who doesn't spend all day every day sort of thinking about these is expected to pick it up. So yeah, thank goodness for Defender, eh? Oh, fab. Well, we're absolutely flying by on time. I've got so many more questions that I wanted to be able to dig into, but I'll make sure we keep to our schedule. I want to say a massive thank you to both Ian and Katrina for talking us through how you think about these problems at your respective organisations. I think it's amazing to sort of step back and see so many common threads from two CISOs sitting in different cities and different countries across the world, but ultimately facing similar challenges and coming together with creative solutions in order to do that. So before I wrap up, maybe Katrina, I'll pass for you to any closing thoughts, and then to Ian, and then we'll go back to Kelly.
Thank you, Robin. I really appreciate the invite. It was lovely to speak to you and to Ian. I think it's nice to hear that we have some similar challenges and to learn how other CISO are tackling those issues. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the next event of this sort.
Great. Thank you. Yes, I've really enjoyed this. It's been a good discussion and nice meeting you, Katrina, as well. I think my final thought on this is that our humans, our colleagues are our last line of defence. We as CISOs owe a great deal to them. Either they're going to lose our job or lose us our jobs, or give us great credit. But if we can do everything that we can to provide the right guidance, the right security awareness, and the right guardrails from software and systems, then I think we're stand a much better chance to win against these external activists, criminals, hackers. That would be my message to go away with.
Yeah, the bad guys and then also the good guys just trying to do their job right, putting those guardrails in place in order to help people do their job in a safe way.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much again, both. Kelly, I will pass back to you, but a pleasure to speak to two of our customers again and hearing more about your world. Thank you.
The role of the Ciso is changing, and the pandemic has brought to light challenges for security leaders and teams across every industry. But it's also brought opportunities to redefine our security strategies and to demonstrate the positive impact on the business. To help us evaluate what's next for security strategy, I'm thrilled to introduce Jerry Perulo, Ciso of Intercontinental Exchange, the parent company of the New York Stock Exchange. With over 25 years of experience, Jerry's here to offer his take on the evolution of cybersecurity and what CISOs need to be thinking about next.
Hi everybody, I'm Tim Sadler, the CEO and co-founder of Tessian. We are here today to talk to security heavyweight Jerry Perulo about the lessons he's learned while securing one of the most influential organizations in financial services. Jerry has been the Chief Information Security Officer at the Intercontinental Exchange for 20 years. I can't think of anyone better placed to talk to us about the changing role of the CISO, today's greatest threats, and also the strategies to protect his organization. Jerry, welcome. It's great to have you here with us today. Thank you so much for making the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Tim. It's great to be here with you today.
So you've been the CISO at ICE for 20 years. How did you get into security, and why do you choose to do this every day?
Yeah, I think like a lot of people, I came into it from the technology side. So, and I always say that there's kind of three pillars of that, right? There's networking, systems, and software engineering. And so for me, I was studying computer engineering, but I got a job really building an ISP in the late 90s. And to do all of that from web hosting to authentication and on, it was a lot of systems, network, and really scripting at the time, which is, it's like kind of faking it in coding. So I started out like that, and then the timing was perfect because the world was really pushing towards cybersecurity. And so I went into a consultancy and performed a couple of those jobs, and then actually started a cybersecurity consultancy within it. Went out on my own, landed ICE as one of my first contracts, and then went on full time. And as you noted, that was about 20 years ago now.
I think it's a rare thing, actually, to see that kind of tenure in an organization, but in the same kind of specific domain. And you started from the technical side of things. How's that changed over the years? Do you think that it's still a common route into security for a lot of people is you come up through that same technical background, or do you think things have changed?
I think it's changed, and it's that, going through that technical background still exists. And there's a lot of CISOs that are what I call first-line CISOs that often report to a CIO, and they usually have come about because of a technical challenge. So it may have been a breach or something that specific. And I think that's still a thing. And even maybe more so now with new technologies that are rolling out, like cloud, right? So we'll probably have a lot of cloud specialists who really grew up in the technology, who are best suited to be a CISO ultimately in a company that's very technology heavy. But in that interim, there's been a new style of CISO that's come about that's more of a risk management professional, what I'll call a second line CISO. And so we've seen a lot of people really pivot into cybersecurity from more traditional risk management areas, which in addition to operational risk management would also include legal, for example. And so we see a lot of professionals coming from that direction and reporting to a CRO or a GC or something like that. And then you have many that that really have to straddle both of those. And I think with a larger org, any individual in the position really has to do at least some of both of those.
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. And what we're here today really to cover is the human factor in security. And I know it's a topic close to both of our hearts. I thought about the best way to start our discussion, and I kind of wanted to ask you something I think I've never asked you before, which is there's this stat, which is 90% of breaches are caused by human error. And I wanted to start by asking you, do you think that's accurate? Do you agree with that?
I'm sure it literally is in some capacity, but some people, when they hear that, they think of human error as someone, well, in our world, it's often misdirecting an email or something like that, well, or someone falling for a ruse. And I don't know that that's 90%. I think you get there by bundling in misconfigurations or mistakes during coding. So that is how you can get to 90%, and it's literally human error, but it may not be a last moment judgment call. It could have been something configured wrong long before.
Yeah, that makes sense. I agree with that in terms of the way we think about it is, people are controlling so many of the systems and data that we have in the enterprise today. I think there was an article in the Financial Times today talking about the recent breach at the Colonial Pipeline. And it was talking about the hidden risk that digitization brings to organizations, where we've had this digital transformation past 40 years. Basically, people have superpowers at their fingertips. You can wire millions of dollars in a few mouse clicks. You can, send your entire customer database on a single email, and it represents and presents risk. How do you think that organizations have got that balance right? We've had all this great benefit from enterprise digitization, but are we really thinking enough about how we secure people as the gatekeepers to that?
Well, yeah, I hesitate to really indict any organizations over it because, we do have a lot of challenges and we do see incidents all the time in the cybersecurity realm, and we do counter those. But, it is somewhat self-policing in that you could say we've deemed it an acceptable risk and that we find that all of those powers, the superpowers, as you call them, are worth it, right? I mean, the empirical data is there because we go on, don't we? And so, I think the advances societally that have come from it net are worth it, so to speak. But it'd be even better, of course, if we could do it without the downsides to it. And so, talking more specifically to our individual organizations, putting enough emphasis on that yet, it varies, of course. And in this business, in risk management, and certainly in adversarial risk management, as I like to call it, we're all proving a negative. And so you can get lucky. That is an option. And really, I find a lot of the job is really about proving, even when things go well, that it wasn't just blind luck, right? Because you could do that a lot cheaper than hiring someone. So trying to prove that we're not just lucky, which gives people a lot more comfort that it's going to sustain and that we're going to continue to not have an issue, whereas luck can change in any given moment. So, with that said, surely, as you see issues that come out, and then we always have these postmortems where we investigate an actual institution that has an issue, you always find out about, not always, but you often find out about hygiene issues or, a lack of a program or lack of diligence. And certainly it can be argued that because we see that data, that there are organizations out there that are not investing enough.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think it's a challenge that every organization faces for the exact reason that you said, which is you can't lock everything down. You have to give people increasingly new systems and tools and access to data to do their job. But you've got to find that balance and that cost-benefit trade-off. What is your advice for security teams that are trying to evaluate those decisions in their organization? They're thinking, hey, a team in our organization has asked us if we can deploy this new system to enable for, could be better communication or something else. Where do you begin as a security team in trying to evaluate that balance between productivity and security risk?
Yeah, I think we're at a point with security testing resource and the abilities from red teams and professional services and bug bounty programs and on. I think we're at a point where it's tenable to say, prove it. So as a security professional, I think it's really important if I hear of a new initiative, and whether it's, hey, we've got this new way to travel through space and time, or whether it's, we've got a new video chat platform, we want to use it, what do you think? That instead of just laying out theoretical issues, which is the classic kind of Ciso pitfall, and it can undermine credibility of the whole org pretty quickly, I think we're at a point where instead we can demonstrate the issue and at a minimum walk through very specific issues. So instead of just saying, well, there's no encryption, instead we can say, well, we think that a eavesdropper, well-positioned, can capture this data and decrypt it, read it or listen to it, and therefore gain advantage, and actually demonstrate it, put it in a lab and try it. And it's not trivial. But with advanced red teams these days and services, it can be done. And in cases where it can't, and we really just can't prove that the theoretical issue can manifest, maybe that's the time to think about risk acceptance and to think about some compromise there. And you certainly shouldn't stop trying if you really think that there's something there. But I think that that's the most effective thing, because there's just too many theoretical issues for even the most resourced group to tackle. So we have to figure out where to prioritize. And there's nothing better, not only for us as a security team to say, well, this is the most present threat, but also for the teams that we're placing the burden upon, whether it's a business side trying to accomplish something, or whether it's a software engineering team trying to deliver, or a network team. It's so much more compelling for them to actually see a demonstration, right? And then the whole argument is over, and instead they're very quickly jumping to remediation, and they really like that life cycle. So I think the answer is really in testing and actual demonstrations.
Yeah, and I guess it varies between organizations, I imagine, but the security team have got to have some stake or awareness or empathy for that productivity benefit, that organizational benefit that a new service or a new platform is going to have. Because surely it would just be easier, it would be the safest thing to say, well, no, we don't support it, or we don't want to welcome that into the organization because it's more risk for us. So do security teams have to be, is it about interlocking with the CIO's office and, with the rest of the company? How do you make sure that security have got a stake in empowering people to do great work as well?
Yeah, it's a really good question and a good point. And it's not new to security, is it? If you think about it, we always hear a lot about communication, and people just want to know not only what to do, but why. They want to hear more of the background, the strategy. And that's not limited to security at all. So I think we have that challenge in security. So rather than saying you can't do that, they want to hear about why, or rather than saying we're going to turn off the ability to write to USB drives, they want to hear about a threat model, and someone could put data and bring it home and put it on Reddit or something like that. So people like to hear the explanations, and I find that they're very open-minded to it in security. We do that. We do demonstrations a lot. A lot of the findings now, whether they're through bug bounty programs or third parties, screenshots at a minimum now. Now there's videos and actual recreations, narrated videos. All of that really helps, because now people hear the why behind the controls they're being asked to implement. The same is true in reverse for the business side. And again, it's not limited to security. Everyone should get a good picture of the business initiative. So the digitization strategy, let's talk about how we expect that to drive revenue. And a lot of that is happening to the investing public, right? And investor relations calls, that sort of thing. So at a minimum, employees can be made aware of those and roped into it, and educated that this isn't just for the externalities here. This is for you too, as an employee, no matter what your duty is. But then also that can happen in more specific silos within businesses where there's a specific project that's going on. And instead of saying, well, we're going to deliver, whatever the acronym is of the day, walk through the workflow, explain from a customer perspective how this is going to provide a lot more value, and tie that all the way back to revenue, and show how it's going to affect the financials, and remind everyone of how that affects them and their compensation. So I think that works on both sides. And for as a security leader, I need to explain the why, and business professionals need to explain the why as well. And that gets people like my teams on board with, I don't know if this is the term you use, but with sympathy, right? And understanding. The mission changes from should we allow this to we certainly need to figure out a way to allow this, which is what the business would really like at the end.
Yeah, for sure. Being an enabler rather than an obstacle. I guess for all the progress that we've made, what is still left to improve? Or where do we go from here in terms of addressing some of the limitations that we have with the current setup? If security training and awareness is what most organizations are doing to keep people secure or reduce this 90% human error breach rate, what do you see as opportunity going forward?
Yeah, well, there's this cycle of kind of paranoia and understanding almost. And so I think we're at a good point in that we've made people aware of the threat, and we've generated a bit of paranoia about it. And some of that's healthy, and some of it can be dilutive, let's say. But what I mean by that, I'll use this an analog, the boardroom. So in the boardroom, firms, and I'm not speaking specifically about our own, I'm talking about financial services because that's what I know best. But in the boardroom, for a long time, it was popular to bring in a guest speaker, and they love third parties to this day, and independents certainly. But that individual would often be from a threat intelligence provider or from an incident response firm. And it was because we were just trying to convince the board of the threat and get them excited about this before they found out about it the hard way. And so there was, and law enforcement, the intelligence community, all of them make great speakers for that because they were ahead of the curve and they were seeing a lot of the threats manifest before the commercial sector. And so we all invested a lot of time in that approach. And sometimes that got a bit out of hand with the scare tactics, either because they were just not as relevant to the company as they were to wherever the speaker came from. And other times there was a little bit of embellishment going on for sure. But I think that that's worked, and not only with the board or with executives, but also with the public. And so now we're at the point, I feel like it's fairly ubiquitous that people know that there's something they need to be worried about and that they need to take some actions. And as examples, I was just talking with someone just this week, and he was telling me that he knew this was overboard, but whenever he gets a one-time passcode texted to him from a service that does that, right after he uses it, he deletes the text message. And he said, I know that's technically not sound. There's no real value in that. It is a one-time password, but I do that. And to me, that's an example of that there's prudence needed, and you should be taking some efforts, but you're not necessarily sure of which ones are the most valuable. And that's about where we are now. So there's a lot of kind of furor generated, a bit of paranoia. But now we really need to focus and improve the signal to noise ratio so that people know not only what actions they do need to take to stay safe, but so they can also identify things that are inherently safe that they don't need to worry about at all. And we're right at that point now. So that signal to noise ratio is everything.
I really love that description of it, actually. We've kind of got to this point where people are paying, if I understand you correctly, you're basically saying people are ready to pay attention. They understand that there's a risk here, but maybe they're in a mode right now of fearing too much. And in order to make progress going forward, what we've got to do is get really sharp at, for different kinds of people, they're going to need to be aware of different things. They're going to need to take certain things more seriously than others, so on and so forth. Otherwise, we're just going to kind of evolve forward into this complexity of we can't keep adding more fear and, hey, you've got to watch out for everything to everybody's job. Otherwise, we're going to be consuming 30% of their time just in either training or them quadruple checking every email, text, phone call they receive.
Right. And if we script the defensive actions too much for people, then it just kind of makes a run book for the adversaries again to realize, well, I can, if I send somebody an email, I already know that they're going to be absolutely paranoid, but as long as the logo is not misspelled, then they'll trust it blindly. And we don't do ourselves a lot of favors when we do things like trying to focus our training on, look to see if just a domain is misspelled, because then an adversary will just realize I can just use a different word entirely instead of trying to impersonate a company name. And as long as it's spelled well, then it'll sail on through.
It's kind of been a unprecedented past year in security. It just seems like some of the events that have happened are, off the charts for anything we've seen before. What's your perspective? What's your take? And what should we be all thinking about as we move forward through 2021 and into the next year?
Yeah, well, it is true that there's been a lot, and I think it's more of a function of just technology and the evolution of that than the pandemic in particular. Not that you mentioned that, but I think it's worth noting because I've seen a lot of folks, or I've been asked a lot, is there more targeting? Is the work from home area being exploited more, anything like that? And I don't think we are seeing a ton of that yet. But we nonetheless are seeing some high profile breaches and incidents that are not necessarily tied to that, and they're continuing. And I think that's a function of the technology and, of the evolution. But looking forward, I do see that we're going to get a lot smarter, I think, and a lot more empathetic in the human security training side of it. And so, something that we've done that has really taken years to really build. And, I could see some commercial products, as analogs of this at some point. But we have this idea of a vigilance score of an employee, and it integrates a number of things in there. And I know some people, all of the things that we try to rate, if you will, are based on reactions, so decision making, really, because that's what we're training. So, for example, in fish testing, right, that's a pretty classic one at this stage. And password strength, right? We crack passwords nightly, and so even if they're compliant with policy, that's one thing. But are you then following the advice and coming with a strong one? And more importantly, if it gets cracked and you're made aware of that, are you changing it straight away? And the security awareness training, and if you're completing it timely. But another bit of that, and it made me think about it when you were talking earlier about misconfigurations and you database administrators or even you business intelligence tools having permission set up wrong, that sort of thing, that type of human judgment. We are at an early stage, but we are capturing that in our incident management system. So we have the notion of recognition in a positive light or a negative contribution to an incident. And most incidents won't have a human tag to them. It's not appropriate. But what's really interesting about it, and I mean, look, we can try things in a closed environment that may not work in mass, right? So you kind of think of it as a pilot. But what I think is a pretty neat approach is we already have, like most organizations, the notion of severities around incidents. And so we multiply that rating, if you will, when someone is tagged positively or negatively in an incident by the severity. So if you click a fish or something like that, and it doesn't go anywhere, that has less of an impact than if you click one and something bad, the severity of the incident does end up getting escalated, which is great because it could mean anything from what I just described in a fish to if there was a mistake in a configuration of a system and it led to something, the severity of the ultimate outcome really measures the severity of the mistake, if you will.
Yeah, I think that concept of the human risk score, I think we're going to see a lot more of that going forward as well. And I know that it's, again, something we have spoken about, and you have an incredible science around it, I think. And for most organizations, they're just beginning to think about it. But I love that point about making it about positive attribution as well. And I think the kind of broader topic I wish we had more time to talk about on this session today is around really taking people on the journey and understanding their own strengths, weaknesses, vulnerabilities, threats specific to them. I think it's all incredibly important and part of this picture for us to get smarter and, get the stat below 90% of breaches starting with human error. Jerry, thank you so much for your time today. It's incredible to speak to you as always, and it's been a great session. Thank you so much for joining us for it.
Thank you, Tim and Jerry, for rounding up the day, and thank you to the rest of our speakers for sharing such powerful insights and stories with us. We have covered a lot today, but the three most important things for you to take away are: 1, security needs to improve the signal-to-noise ratio. As we heard from Jerry, Punit, and many others, it's the job of security to reduce the noise of potential threats so that SOC teams and employees can focus on taking the right action when a real threat occurs. Number 2, security needs to get personal. Whether it's using human layer risk scores or simply taking a granular view of how your employees are operating, we need to know where risk really lies so that we can deliver targeted and effective training, as opposed to a one-size-fits-all approach. And number 3, attackers know people are vulnerable and they exploit it. As we heard from all of our speakers, it's no one's fault, but the reality is things like weak passwords will persist, people will make mistakes, and attackers will continue to target employees because of that. Training and awareness programs are a great baseline, but technology needs to do better and provide better guardrails to empower people to work securely. So, on behalf of everyone at Tessian, I want to thank you all for joining the Human Layer Security Summit. I hope you gained a better understanding of how human-first cybersecurity can amplify business and empower your employees to do their best work while staying secure. And finally, this event would not be possible without the incredible planning and support of our events and production teams, our speakers, and our partners. And last, thank you finally to our audience for joining us today. If you enjoyed watching, please head over to Tessian.com/resources, where you'll find more research, threat intelligence, and ebooks to help you to protect your employees and your business. Thank you so much.